It's not a shooting war, but it's a real war with serious consequences all the same. The Chinese Communist Party is waging unrestricted warfare, that is economic, trade, financial, and informational warfare against the United States. And there is a significant danger that the conflict may soon transform into a shooting war, as Communist China sets its sights on the free and democratic nation of Taiwan. Communist China won't likely attack tomorrow or even in the next few months. They just aren't ready. But the Biden administration's weakness across the globe and failure to combat CCP aggression makes invasion increasingly likely with the passage of time. What you may not realize is that right now the CCP is very vulnerable. On today's episode, I'll explain that vulnerability, and I'll tell you exactly what we must do to topple the CCP and save Taiwan. Our window of opportunity is closing. The time to act is now. Then, in our Behind the Headline segment, Disney puts overt LGBT messaging in a show for kids. Chicago Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson says the government can solve lawlessness and violence by making sure kids feel supported. And John Fetterman returns to the Senate, even though he is obviously unfit to hold office. I'm Doug Wardlow, and this is Founding Principles.
It is time to go on offense. This is Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
Communist China appears poised to attack the free and democratic island nation of Taiwan, either by launching an all-out invasion or by blockading the island and cutting it off from the rest of the world until it submits to CCP rule. Many are anxious that a shooting war is imminent. That anxiety is well-founded given the CCP's recent behavior, including a mock invasion of the island, as well as CCP General Secretary and PRC President for Life Xi Jinping's incessant discussion of the need to absorb Taiwan into the mainland. Right now, at the present moment, the risks and negative consequences of a military move against Taiwan are likely too great for the Chinese Communist Party to withstand. But things are changing fast as the CCP continues its rapid military buildup and wages unrestricted trade, economic, financial, and informational warfare against the United States. And Biden's failure to respond and continued projection of weakness around the globe encourages aggression. And so, while a communist invasion of the freedom-loving Taiwanese likely won't take place this week or next month, the likelihood increases significantly over the next year or two, especially with a weak Biden administration in charge. Indeed, CIA Director William Burns said this February that President Xi has ordered the CCP military to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. It's very clear that if the United States does not immediately change our posture to recognize and call out the CCP as an enemy, immediately ramp up military preparedness in the region to deter invasion, and also begin waging economic, financial, and informational warfare against the CCP in earnest, then the chances that the CCP will be in a position to invade Taiwan before 2027 skyrocket. At the same time, the United States and the West have an opportunity right now to disrupt the CCP and end its existence, sending the problem of an invasion of Taiwan to the dustbin of history. And that's very important because reunifying Taiwan with the mainland seems to be Xi Jinping's top priority, though he'd prefer to do it without firing a shot. Let's listen to Xi himself. During the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party this last October, he opened the event with a speech mostly about Taiwan.
解决台湾问题是中国人自己的事，要由中国人来决定。我们坚持以最大诚意，尽最大努力，争取和平统一的前景，但绝不承诺放弃使用武力，保留采取一切必要措施的选项。
The communists are trying the big stick approach. They will first use every method short of invasion to achieve reunification. Well, it's not really reunification. They just want to absorb Taiwan since they don't have a legitimate claim to Taiwan. They're hoping that the giant club they carry will help incentivize the Taiwanese into accepting this so-called reunification. Their methods start with economic and political maneuvers to strengthen ties with their Asian brethren, all while attempting to insert communist shills into the Taiwanese government. In the same speech, Xi said, quote, "We will advance extensive and in-depth consultations on cross-strait relations and national unification with people from all political parties and groups in Taiwan, and jointly promote the peaceful development of cross-strait relations and the peace of the motherland," close quote. Sounds peaceful and beneficial to everybody in Taiwan, right? Come on, everybody, let's jump on the commie reunification train. Just ignore your loss of freedom, the cheapness of human life here in the mainland, and certainly ignore those gulags. This so-called reunification is going to happen in Xi's mind. He even started his speech saying so. Quote, solving the Taiwan question and realizing the complete reunification of the motherland is the unswerving historical task of the party, the common aspiration of all Chinese sons and daughters, and an inevitable requirement for realizing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, close quote. Sounds like priority 1, 2, and 3 for the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, the threat of force is front and center. Xi finished his speech by saying, quote, the Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, oppress, or enslave us. Anyone who dares try to do so will have their heads bashed bloody against the Great Wall of Steel forged by the flesh and blood of 1.4 billion Chinese people. The historical wheels of national reunification and rejuvenation are rolling forward and will certainly be achieved, close quote. Okay, so during the most important event on the CCP calendar, the president, the General Secretary of the CCP, stresses so-called reunification by any means necessary. If so-called peaceful means fail, then he says they will bash the heads of all who oppose them. Nice. Maybe this is more Sun Tzu's strategy to keep the West off balance. We know that bringing Taiwan back into the fold is at the top of the CCP's docket. We know they are building their military as fast as possible, and we know that they are running around the world with their Belt and Road Initiative, gobbling up resources, strategic ports, and shipping lanes faster than Pac-Man. They are preparing for this so-called reunification and for war if need be. But China isn't quite ready for a shooting war, at least not yet. But they are definitely working on their readiness, and they want the United States and the free world to fear them. They want us to stand down for fear of provoking a shooting war. They want us to give up so they can achieve their goals of absorbing Taiwan, removing the United States from our position as the leader of the free world, and ushering in a new authoritarian world order, all without firing a shot. I have detailed their Communist China's military buildup and the Belt and Road Initiative in previous episodes, so be sure to check those out. But the CCP's recent behavior is meant to reinforce that fear. In early April, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen met with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the most senior U.S. leader to meet with a Taiwanese leader on U.S. soil in many decades. The CCP had a collective meltdown, as this is about as close as the United States has come to foreign relations with Taiwan since Jimmy Carter cut off relations in 1979. China then launched 3 days of large-scale military drills. They simulated a blockade to seal off Taiwan, encircling the island with air and naval forces and conducting maneuvers that essentially simulated an invasion. For a time, it looked like an attack was imminent. And then, last week, the CCP broadcast to the world that they finally conducted a successful ground-based mid-course missile interception test. This means they are approaching the ability to knock down missiles coming in from space, a major step forward in the CCP's missile technology. The CCP wants the world scared, afraid that the giant Asian tiger will attack at any moment, and afraid that they will win. They want the world to stand down, fearful of confronting them, worried about the costs. They want the United States to sit idly by, nervous to act or even build up our own military, while the communists gain strength and approach true military and economic parity with the United States. And then, once they have military parity and a more stable economy, they will go ahead and blockade or invade Taiwan. So, we cannot let the CCP achieve military or economic parity with us. And if we act now, it will not be difficult to make sure that the CCP never does. You see, for all their strength, Communist China suffers from glaring weaknesses that have the potential to topple the regime. But those weaknesses are slowly being dealt with. We have a shrinking window to act. At present, the Chinese economy is in dire shape. In 2022, GDP growth in China was 3%. Roughly half of the official CCP target, and one of the worst numbers on record for the communist economy that grew by an average of 9% since 1989. And that 3% figure is the CCP's number. They are notorious for falsifying economic statistics. So mainland China's actual GDP growth last year was almost certainly much lower than 3%, probably less than half that. The Chinese people are feeling the crunch. In November 2022, China's consumer confidence index plummeted to a record low. That matched a steep decline in Chinese household income growth, now at its lowest point in over 20 years. With less money in their pockets, Chinese consumers are driving a very real per capita consumption decline, a trend that started around 2017, was exacerbated by horrible pandemic policies, and continues to this day. Household consumption makes up just about 40% of China's GDP, and the decline is dragging their economy down. But there is another tiger lurking within the Chinese economy's bamboo forest. China's property market. It is crashing. The housing bubble there is bursting. Like Western governments, China's local governments issue bonds, but unlike the West, those local governments cannot use tax revenues to fund bond payments. Enter local government financing vehicles, or LGFVs. Instead of using tax money, LGFVs capitalize investments, largely using the transfer of land use rights. government owns all land in China, and they sell off rights to use the land for periods of about 70 years. So China's local governments have been essentially selling public land to fund their infrastructure projects and drive economic growth. I think you can see the potential issue here. If you pay for everything with revenue from basically land sales to housing developers, and the housing prices fall, well, then your local government revenues crash, and it becomes difficult to make those bond payments. The risk of default goes way up. And the CCP local governments are buried under mountains of LGFV debt. According to the IMF, the total of all LGFV debt in China has ballooned to a record 66 trillion yuan, or about $10 trillion. That is equivalent to half of the Chinese economy, and about 15% higher than the prior year. And who knows how accurate those numbers really are? It is likely much worse than that because, as we said before, the CCP isn't known for its transparency. Now add in the massive stimulus pumped into the economy by the CCP. Bloomberg estimated stimulus during the pandemic to be about 103 trillion yuan from 2020 through May of 2022. That's about $15 trillion. Now, about 25% of all the provinces in China will be spending over half of their entire revenue on nothing but debt repayment by 2025. That's not good. Evergrande, the nation's largest real estate developer, collapsed in 2021 and is just now restructuring its debts overseas. Several other developers also defaulted. The result was a 20% drop in home prices in many major cities and a huge drop in home sales. The top 100 developers in China watched their 2022 sales, residential and commercial, drop 42% from 2021, according to December 2022 data from the China Real Estate Information Corporation. And now, many Chinese citizens are refusing to pay their mortgages because they don't want to continue paying for homes that have not been built and may not ever be built. These are usually second homes that Chinese folks invest in. CCP banks are even raising age limits on mortgages all the way to 95 in some areas. Take a 25-year loan out at 70 to repay by the time the borrower is 95? Seriously? Loans are becoming multi-generational. Some of these mortgages must be guaranteed by the borrower's children, with a combined monthly income at least twice the monthly mortgage payment. All of this is beyond problematic for the CCP, especially since property and related industry make up about a third of China's entire GDP. Indeed, the collapse of China's real estate market has led to street protests in cities across the country. To make matters worse, youth unemployment in China is spiraling out of control. As of now, youth unemployment sits at 18% for 16 to 24-year-olds, up from 13% in early 2022. Again, that's according to government statistics that probably understate the problem by quite a bit. Most of the major tech companies in China are hemorrhaging workers, making it even harder for young Chinese to find work. ByteDance, one of the largest Chinese tech companies and the owner of TikTok, is planning on laying off at least 10,000 workers this year alone. And they're not alone. The CCP is an export-driven economy. The U.S. has an enormous trade deficit with China, importing $537 billion while exporting only $154 billion to China in 2022. And like ByteDance in the tech sector, China's export-heavy industries are experiencing major problems. Late last year, U.S. manufacturing orders in China were down 40%, according to CNBC data. In August of 2022, China exported $50.3 billion in total goods to the United States. In February of 2023, that number was down to $30.6 billion, another huge drop of about 39%. In November 2022, the Chinese government announced overall export numbers, not just exports to the United States, that were far below expectations as well. This helps explain the massive drop in shipping volume from China to the United States, which fell about 20% in the last quarter of 2022 alone. Countless numbers of Chinese shipping containers sit waiting and empty at Chinese ports. Demand for CCP exports is drying up. Speaking to CNBC, Joe Monahan, CEO of Worldwide Logistics Group, said, quote, "The unrelenting decline in container freight rates from Asia, caused by a collapse in demand, is compelling ocean carriers to blank more sailings than ever before as vessel utilization hits new lows." That collapse in demand is shown by another gigantic drop, this time in retail sales of consumer goods. The year-over-year growth for that in China fell from 12% growth in the spring of 2021 to a 12% contraction over the following year. This spells trouble for the export-heavy Chinese economy, especially as the trends look to continue straight through 2023 and beyond. Add to this fact that the Chinese population actually shrank last year for the first time since 1961, and you have a full-blown economic crisis. The CCP one-child policy has decimated the coming generations. The percent of their population that is over 60 is projected to steadily grow, reaching over 48% by 2080. It will be nearly impossible for the working-age population to support that many elderly people in China. and the Chinese population will continue to shrink, with some projecting it may be only half its current number in as little as 30 years. That much demographic collapse would cause economic chaos even within a healthy Chinese economy. Combined with the many economic and fiscal problems China currently faces, it will bring about absolute disaster. Which brings us to the fear hanging amongst CCP planners concerning an invasion of Taiwan. Unlike Western democracies, the CCP does not govern with the will and support of the people. They govern with fear, force, and coercion. The poor citizens they rule over have no recourse to remedy problems they see within their government. Here in the United States, when the economy takes, people can, theoretically at least, voice their displeasure by voting at the ballot box, changing what they buy, moving where they live, changing jobs. We have a multitude of options thanks to the freedoms that we enjoy. Over in CCP land, they have no freedoms and no options, really, except one: revolution. For them, it is either suffer or revolt. And the CCP is petrified that their 1.4 billion people will say, "We've had enough," and throw out the CCP. That's why the CCP has to keep their people at least somewhat satisfied. In fact, that has been the unspoken bargain to the Chinese people that the Chinese people have had with the CCP for decades, since at least the Tiananmen Square massacre. The Chinese people say basically, unspokenly, we'll give up our political freedoms, provided that our economic security and prosperity are ever improving. If the CCP can't continue to improve economic conditions for the Chinese people, then the unspoken bargain is broken, and the CCP loses all legitimacy, any legitimacy it has left, at least. For the CCP regime, economic stability and prosperity are a matter of life or death. They are needed for the CCP to hold on to power, and holding on to power is the only thing that the CCP cares about. When unrest breaks out in China, the CCP stamps it out ruthlessly in order to preserve the regime's grip on power. That's why the Tiananmen Square crackdown was so brutal. It's also why the recent COVID lockdowns in China were so long and harsh. COVID had the potential to wreck the economy, so the population had to be preemptively frightened and locked up in their homes, unable to even think about unrest. In authoritarian governments, unrest in general is very dangerous. Those governments inevitably have far more disgruntled people than Western republics do. So when there is trouble, the chances for it to spin violently out of control are much greater. When it comes to Taiwan, the CCP has to calculate whether an invasion will exacerbate their economic problems into uncontrollable chaos, threatening the regime. On the other hand, if things look dire for the regime, they may try to lash out at Taiwan in a last-ditch effort to direct public attention away from domestic problems and hope that war has a nationalizing effect. Always beware an injured tiger that's been backed into a corner. Or think of China as a boxer who's about to go down. Sometimes that's when, in desperation, the one going down delivers a frenzied blow that might turn out to be a knockout. But there's no guarantee that the Chinese people will run to the banner of the CCP in a fight against Taiwan. It's possible that the reverse could occur. And there's also the very real possibility that China might not win a war over Taiwan. If China attacks Taiwan, the Western world, and maybe more, would likely economically isolate the CCP as it did Russia. China would be kicked from the SWIFT banking system and sanctioned to the hilt. Tariffs on their exports would spring up in every corner of the globe. Major markets would be essentially closed off to goods from mainland China. All of China's economic troubles would be exacerbated. The Chinese economy would have to rely solely on Russia, North Korea, Iran, maybe India, and other nations unfriendly to the West. But that wouldn't be enough to sustain the CCP market and satiate their population. Their market needs the United States, Japan, South Korea, and the EU too much. Look at the CCP's 15 top trading partners from 2022. Maybe 3 or 4 might remain at significant levels in that scenario. Heck, the United States took a full 16% of their exports, double the next country on the list. A war over Taiwan would send China into a vicious economic cycle of falling exports, consumption, and income, destroying their economy. At some point during that cycle, the hundreds of millions of Chinese people who aren't exactly thrilled with the CCP could very well act. The economic devastation would be too much to bear, and they would have no recourse but to push the CCP from power. So, forcibly taking Taiwan is a very risky proposition for the CCP. And that's especially true when you consider that China probably wouldn't win if the United States and our allies defend Taiwan vigorously, although the United States would suffer extremely serious losses. Right now, China can't stand toe-to-toe with the U.S. Navy, at least not yet, although China does have hypersonic anti-ship missile capabilities that would likely do significant damage to our Navy. But the Japanese, South Koreans, Australians, British, and Filipinos wouldn't just sit idly by either. The odds of them joining the United States are very high, especially given that British and Australians have a treaty with the United States in the region. And then there's Taiwan itself. There's no guarantee that the CCP could even beat Taiwan one-on-one with as many weapons as the United States has sold them over the years, although we need to arm Taiwan much more. Look at what happened to Russia in Ukraine. To invade and lose would destroy the credibility of the CCP forever, especially within their own country. So the CCP is not quite ready to launch an all-out invasion of Taiwan. It's more likely that they'll attempt a blockade, but they aren't quite ready for that either. Here's the problem, however. China is growing stronger every day. We aren't deploying enough military resources to the region, nor are we developing the right military technologies to counter China. We've been focusing on aircraft carriers and a style of warfare that is going to become pretty much irrelevant. The stronger that China becomes, the more they can insulate their economy from the ill effects of an invasion. If and when China comes close to parity with the United States from a military point of view, and if they strengthen their economy to the point where they think at least that they can withstand the fallout from an invasion, something they are working on by teaming up with Brazil and India, Iran, Russia, and other countries to form a trading bloc and reduce dependence on the United States and Western Europe, well then at that point they will pull the trigger on an invasion of Taiwan. But we can act now to ensure that invasion never happens. It's actually very simple. But it would take a leader with more courage, political capital, and sheer will than Biden could muster in 10 lifetimes. We must simply enact all of those invasion-related economic punishments on the CCP right now. We need to wage unrestricted economic, financial, trade, and informational warfare against the CCP starting immediately. The CCP economy is teetering, and we need to help the people of China revolt against the CCP. The justifications are abundant. There is a full-blown genocide happening in Western China as we speak. The CCP is rapidly increasing ties with the Russians and the Iranians to bolster all their economies and protect them from the West. Buying up Russian oil and gas funds the invasion of Ukraine, as does helping the Iranians who are selling weapons to Russia. This new axis of evil is already in a Cold War and a proxy war against the United States and the West. And communist China is actively stealing our technology and doing their best to destroy our culture with psychological operations like I've discussed in prior episodes with respect to TikTok. Oh, and we just found active CCP police and spying stations inside of the United States, including one smack in the middle of New York City. What more reason do we need? It is time for the United States to take the lead and save the Chinese people from the evils of the CCP. Most favored nation status, it must be revoked now. The CCP must be locked out of the SWIFT banking system. Massive tariffs must be enacted on all CCP goods, and their most important export products must be banned. All assets of CCP members or CCP-related entities must be frozen. The CCP must be locked out of the capital markets. Every sanction that is currently on Russia must also apply to the CCP and related entities. The U.S. must sever diplomatic relations with the CCP immediately and establish formal relations with Taiwan. American leaders must call openly for Xi and the entire Communist Party in China to step down. But wouldn't all this force the CCP into a corner and increase the chance of a Taiwanese invasion? Well, maybe, but probably not. We must call their bluff now before they get any stronger. Every month we wait makes a potential shooting conflict more likely and more deadly as the CCP grows its military and steals our technologies. And the Chinese people have a say in this as well. If we show strength and truly take on the CCP with a real economic, financial, and informational war, will they just sit idly by and watch? No, they won't. Especially not if we work to include them in this endeavor. Instead of running around in Russia, our intelligence agencies should be searching out potential leaders of a Chinese resistance. The dissent is there. There's a lot of it. We just have to find it and help organize it and help support it. Our window of opportunity is open. The CCP economy is weak, and they aren't ready to challenge us militarily quite yet. And they have joined up with a new axis of evil that attacked an innocent, peaceful nation. Joe Biden will never give the order. He's compromised. How else can you explain Biden handing over Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan to the Taliban, an air base that is only 400 miles from China? We need a new president who has demonstrated his ability and willingness to take on the CCP. One who will put the screws on the CCP economy. One who will find and provide real material support for those Chinese in China who will help bring about a free China that is allied with the United States and Taiwan. Let's make it happen and watch the CCP vanish into the dustbin of history. Let's save 1.4 billion people from the evils of the Chinese Communist Party without firing a shot. And now it's time for Beyond the Headlines. Well, if you like the content that we are providing, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, drop a comment in the comment section. If you're listening to this on the audio podcast, give us a 5-star rating. Doing each of those things helps us tremendously. Well, first up today, the radical left in general isn't about winning arguments. They can't win arguments because they don't have logic or reason on their side. Instead, they use force. They shut down and censor opposing views. And they have made a long march through just about all of our American institutions. They use them to shove their radical viewpoints down the throats of regular Americans. One of the left's favorite tactics is to push their viewpoints through popular culture. And then when we conservatives push back, they ask, why do you conservatives or why do you Republicans, why do you care about that issue so much? Why do you care about, blank, whatever the issue is, so much? Yeah, It's an interesting and very annoying tactic. They try to make us conservatives seem like we are obsessed weirdos, but in fact, they, the leftists, are the ones who are forcing these issues. Nowhere do we see this tactic employed more than in the realm of the so-called LGBT plus QIA alphabet soup issue field, wielded by insane left radical groups like the Human Rights Campaign and their allies. Apparently, Disney has a children's TV show called Dino Ranch. I'm glad that neither my kids nor I have ever seen it, except for a little bit of this episode I'm going to talk about here, because it is chock full of leftist political messaging, most of it not at all subtle. It's on Disney Plus and available for everyone who subscribes to watch. In a recent episode, cartoon dinosaurs, both males, end up adopting 2 eggs. Other cartoon characters chime in that the 2 gay dinosaurs will be great parents. The scene ends with the dinosaurs cuddling. Now, if leftists want to pretend that we conservatives are obsessed with the culture wars, I think they need to first answer the question why the radical left and their allies like Disney are constantly pushing LGBTQIA alphabet soup messaging on our kids. Whether it's through Disney Plus or through expanded government-run preschools, it seems as though the leftists are trying to brainwash children from just about the moment they are born. It's wrong, of course, because it completely disrespects and undermines the rights of parents to direct and control the upbringing of children. That's a constitutional right. And that's actually the left's intent. Traditional families where the parents guide their children to become productive, freedom-loving, self-sufficient, moral individuals and members of society, well, those traditional families, they get in the way of the leftists' plans to tear down our country and replace it with their Marxist dystopia. Now, in light of the recent Bud Light controversy, I think those of us on the right and all people of common sense who, as a result of having common sense, reject the left's ridiculous agenda, need to boycott places and companies that hate us, like Disney and Anheuser-Busch. Every company that supports a radical worldview that goes against our values must not receive our dollars. And we need to start organizing this boycott activity. We can't succeed with a boycott like this unless we get together, whether in local Republican Party groups or patriot groups or churches or community groups, and identify which companies we will boycott and how we will keep each other accountable for those boycotts. That's how you do this. You've got to organize. The left organizes all the time. We on the right, we tend not to. But it's time that we start doing it. And then we need to work to identify and patronize alternative sources of goods and media that are friendly to America's founding principles and the conservative cause. For example, the Daily Wire is building out alternatives in the entertainment world. It's a very noble goal. Companies like MyPillow likewise need our support. Now, full disclosure, I serve as general counsel for MyPillow, so I'm biased. But I can tell you this, it's a fantastic conservative company, and Mike Lindell is a great man and a wonderful Christian who takes a lot of slings and arrows in the fight for freedom. My views expressed on this show, of course, are just my own personal views, and they don't reflect anyone else's views necessarily. And I just got to give that disclaimer. But MyPillow is a fantastic company, and Mike Lindell is a great man, and I hope everyone will put some effort into identifying and supporting conservative companies, even as we avoid companies that support the left. While more alternatives are being built, it's up to us to put in the legwork when shopping for anything. Take the small step of boycotting bad companies. Take the time to be organized about your boycott activities. If we all organize across the country, we can force corporations to give up their dedication to left-wing politics. Change won't happen overnight, but it's up to us to make sure our kids grow up in a better country than the one we grew up in. We can do this. We can lead our country back to its founding principles. Indeed, we must. All right, second up today. The new Chicago mayor is already showing that he will be even more radical than Mayor Lori Lightfoot. It's hard to believe, but it's true. Last weekend, there were mass riots, looting, assaults, and all sorts of criminal activity in Chicago. Several videos emerged showing crowds beating random people in the streets. The mayor-elect, Brandon Johnson, decided to immediately denounce the violence and send in more police to control the situation and restore order. No, just kidding. That's not at all what he did. He actually called on everyone to stop demonizing the youth who were causing the trouble. Here's an actual quote from Mayor-elect Johnson. Actually, let's just watch the clip of what Mayor-elect Johnson said.
Look, demonizing children is wrong. We have to keep them safe as well. Have you ever taught middle school? I have. Have you ever raised young people? Do you understand the risk that young people take just because they're young? Do you know that home plate is at the bottom of my stairs? I found that out when my son was sliding down those stairs trying to score. They're young. Sometimes they make silly decisions. They do. And so we have to make sure that we are investing to make sure that young people know that they are supported.
Yes, what silly decisions are being made by those crazy kids in Chicago? like deciding to clear the Walmart shelves of iPhones and Xbox games. Just how silly, you know? And running up to random passersby on the sidewalk and beating them up. Wacky childhood adventures. Give me a break. Is this guy insane? He also excused the criminality by saying these youth are just deprived of opportunity, as if more after-school book clubs would wipe away the violence. It's the old left-wing, completely baseless trope that impoverished material circumstances are the main driver of crime, and it's simply not true. It is sad that children have to grow up in Chicago, a city where lawbreakers aren't punished. Maybe if lawlessness was punished, and maybe if we stressed the need for children to have both a mother and a father in a traditional home, then we'd be on the road to affording a lot of real and meaningful opportunities to youth in Chicago. But let's not act like someone who is looting and assaulting people isn't at fault, because they absolutely are. Criminals must not be given a pass. We cannot inculcate the ethic of legal obligation, that is the idea that the law should be followed because it is the law, nor can we expect kids to develop a healthy sense of morality if we refuse to punish people who break the law. Unfortunately, the current and incoming mayors of Chicago don't feel that way. And so, the cycle of violence and broken families will continue. Hopefully, one day the voters of Chicago will grow tired of the chaos and vote for leaders who know how to begin setting things right. Finally today, last week, Nancy Pelosi made headlines as she defended Senator Dianne Feinstein for calls for her resignation due to her declining physical health and mental capacity. Nancy Pelosi's claim was that, I've never seen them do this to a man. Such a surprising angle for her to take, right? It's ridiculous. While now clips are circulating of Senator John Fetterman, who is back on Capitol Hill after an absence due to depression. Fetterman recently chaired a subcommittee meeting, and during his opening statement, he looked and sounded very unwell. You recall that Senator Fetterman was a victim of a stroke prior to his election. It's a very sad situation. Hardly able to string together words to form sentences, his appearance did not exactly inspire confidence, to say the least. It's important to note that I'm not picking on someone for being a stroke victim, and I'm absolutely and obviously not criticizing Feinstein for her declining health either. The same goes for President Biden, whose mental decline has been quite obvious for some time and quite severe. Life happens, it's not a partisan issue. But we do have to assess our leaders' competence, and it is increasingly obvious that Senator Fetterman doesn't have the ability to fulfill his role as a senator, just like Joe Biden doesn't have the ability to fulfill his role as president. That's abundantly clear. Lots of discussion has taken place among Republicans recently about candidate quality, the issues we run on, and much more. I'm not so sure we're going to come up with a perfect formula before 2024 for all Republican candidates, but we have to figure out why so many people voted for a man in Pennsylvania that was and is so obviously unwell, lacking the capacity to fulfill the duties of his office. Leaving out fraud for a moment, and we think there was fraud in Pennsylvania, we know that some people did vote for Fetterman. Some actual people did vote for this guy. Why did hardworking Pennsylvanians vote for a man who not only pledged to eliminate fracking, which is ridiculous, but a man who isn't mentally capable of such a significant job? Pennsylvania is not California. It isn't a state that just picks Democrats because they're Democrats. Conservative Republicans can and should be able to win in Pennsylvania. This time around, let's all be sure to ask the hard questions earlier. Overall, we need a more aggressive approach. Let's quit softening our message by imitating the likes of John McCain and Mitt Romney. Let's be bold and show the voters a clear contrast to the corrupt left and the corrupt left-wing radicals that are currently running and ruining our country. That's the only sure path to electoral victory, showing that clear contrast. And it's the only way we'll ever be able to guide our great country back to its founding principles. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the content that we're providing, please go ahead and like the video, give the podcast a 5-star rating, subscribe to our channel. Doing all those things helps the show tremendously. It helps us grow the show and multiply its impact. And tune in next time for Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow. And one more thing, remember, the Communist Party of China, the CCP, must be destroyed.